Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
There is an assumption when we do content-based instruction that students will be interested. Who wants to study I am, you are, he is? It's boring. Let's conjugate the verb to be. Let's conjugate this. Let's, every day we've got 10 new vocabulary words. Everybody write down the word 3 times. Look it up in your dictionary, write down the definition. Homework, each sentence, or each word put in 3 sentences. Tomorrow morning I'll check your homework. Boring. So let's use content. Okay, we're going to have students talking about money. Interesting?
Yes.
For 65% of you, probably. 35% of you, it's like, I already know money. Why do I care? Or, hey, that Korean money is cool, but why do I want to study about money in English? Why don't you just tell me in Filipino or in Korean? Right? So there's an assumption that it's interesting, but in fact, we can never please everybody. Just like my lesson is not pleasing everybody here. I hope it's pleasing most of you. No one has thrown anything at me yet. And then we also need to make it clear, what is content-based instruction versus some other concepts? Well, here's my answer. Content-based instruction is not how to teach. You're here to learn how to teach. But instead, it's what to teach, or to teach with what. And some grammarians call this. With what to teach. And I have the word text in quotes, because text doesn't have to be written words. Text could be anything we want to talk about. And that's, when we get into task-based instruction, that comes next. Content-based instruction does not dictate the teacher and learner roles. Just because we're doing content-based instruction doesn't mean teacher talks and students listen. And that's why content-based instruction and task-based learning can, this together nicely, can, not must. Okay. CBLT has an explicit language learning aim. When we do content-based instruction with the theme content-based language teaching, we know we're teaching language. And the students know we're working on language. There is a language point. Too often in content-based instruction and in task-based teaching, people forget this is a language class. At the end of the day, we should learn something or be better at something. Now, for some of you, English is not your first or even second language. For some of you, my language, which is fast today because I don't have enough time, is already very demanding. My answer is, okay. That's reality, that's the world. Not all students are the same. If I speak very slowly, so everyone understands. 89% of you are, maybe me too. Right? There is a heritage, okay? There is a history. Content-based instruction wasn't invented. Some people think it comes from languages across the curriculum. Some people say, think about when the Greeks wanted to learn a language. What did they do? They captured people who were slaves, and they became teachers of little kids. And they had no background in language teaching. They just sat down and taught. They just taught to children. How did I learn Korean? I think I sat in about 6 or 7 Korean classroom 1-hour session or less in my life. Because I'm busy, I don't have time to take a course. I learned on the street, I learned by asking questions, I learned by people saying something and me figuring it out. That's a different way of teaching. That's also content, because there was something I needed to do. There was some content that was delivered, and I figured out the language. And mostly, hopefully, I remembered that and figured it out and it stuck. That's kind of immersion. sink or swim. Okay, this goes back to the thing we were talking about before. Content demand, how hard is the content? Language demand, how hard is the language? Before we were talking about flow. Now we're talking about balance. You have this much brains. Well, he has only this much. Anyway, you have this much brains that you could put into something. Now, a piece of your brain is, oh, I'm worried about my son because he's not feeling very well and his grades have been going down. Maybe he has a girlfriend. I don't know, right? So part of your brain is already gone. But the rest of your brain is trying to think about a lesson. Maybe it's teaching math through English. How much of your brain is thinking about the content? And how hard is that content for you? What's 2 plus 2?
4.
It's easy. What 389 times 467? Half of you can't do it in any language, right? Even with paper and pencil. Where's my calculator, you know? The content's more challenging. How many planets circle our known sun? Anybody? How many planets circle our known sun? 8? You don't like Pluto, okay? 9, you like Pluto, okay? Hey, the science changed last year, right? Last year. Language demand, how hard is the language? But you only have this much brain. So my argument is, as language demand gets higher, as the language is more sophisticated or more difficult for some reason, and the language and the content demand goes up and goes down, there is this balancing, there is this ideal cognitive load that if everything's too easy, if the content is easy and the language is easy, we're bored. Okay, this is the same thing we were talking about with flow going this way. Now we're looking at it a different way. And if things are too hard, it's difficult. So instead of talking about skill and flow, now we're talking about the perfect brain functioning. Think about your smartphone or your computer, and you're trying to do something on a computer, and you're doing a live chat, and you're downloading a video, and then your sister calls on Skype, and your computer or cognitive overload. Okay, multitasking. All of our students need to learn to multitask in English. Similar to what we looked before, here's a task, what do we need to do? Here's the content, social studies in middle school. Here's the language, semantics, syntax, whatever. This is a picture, it's a good thing to look at on your free time. Debbie Short did a lot of work on task-based and content-based. I really, really want you guys to take a look at this on your free time. Okay, so we're planning our class, we're planning a content class. We're gonna work on lesson plans at about 11:30. By the way, do we have another break scheduled? Oh, at 3, but no more break before lunch. I got you. All right. So let's design a lesson. First of all, we can think about cohesion. How well do things fit together? We could have a class talking about science. We could have a class talking about biology. It's a subset, right? We could have a class talking about the environment. Smaller. We could have a class talking about the pond that's behind the school, that when it's rainy, it gets really full, and in the dry season, it gets really low, but it's always there. There's always a few fish in there, except when the neighbors get really hungry, right? Whatever this topic is, we want there to be like a series of classes or even one class. We want the things to fit together, and we want it to be appropriate to the learner's design. Now, if we're talking to elementary school children, we don't need to talk about microbes, probably, parasites inside the fish gills, that if you don't cook the fish, you can get sick and die. So we don't need to talk about that. Probably, maybe, I don't know what your standards are. How long is a class? One class session, or even less? 30 minutes? Could be called a topical class. 1 to 3 weeks is kind of thematic. You're teaching something over a period of weeks. It doesn't have to be the only thing you're teaching, but you try to put a number of classes together under the theme of the pond. All the things we're going to talk about, we're going to try to tie together under the pond in the back, and maybe one day we'll spend half of a class time outside walking on the pond and exploring some of the language we've done. Could be 6 weeks or more. Okay, authenticity and genuineness is often a question. Let me give you an example. I don't have one with me, but let's say I have, from the United States, I brought back a menu from TGI Fridays. See, TGI Fridays. I have a real menu. I show it in class. Is it authentic? Is it genuine? Sure. I make photocopies for my students, but I show them the original. Is it authentic? Is it genuine? I download from the internet an image of a real menu, and I show it on the PowerPoint, and I give a photocopy or a printout to all my students. Is it authentic? Is it genuine? The language is difficult and it's really complex, so I simplify it, but I keep the TGI Friday menu, logo and everything, but I just cut it down to one page and I simplify it. Is it still authentic? Is it still genuine? We call it simplified, okay? How about if I use the logo, but I create it entirely new, I put new prices in it, I put Philippine peso numbers on it instead of US dollars and da-da-da-da, right? Change it again. How about if I just create Sam's Restaurant in my mind, and is it authentic? But it's based on that TGI Fridays, but I don't talk to kids about TGI Fridays. Is it authentic? Is it genuine? Why do we care? Well, because a lot of learners get motivation by seeing stuff like this. So we can always try to think, can I improve student motivation by making it authentic, genuine? There's a real need for this knowledge. This is a real thing. Okay? For all of you who are not Korean, having a Korean coin in your pocket might be really cool. For those of you who are Korean, it's like, yeah, so. Motivation. Is there a conflict with the subject matter class? If I'm teaching a class on the pond, will the science teacher come running into me in the teacher's room next hour and say, what are you doing? This is my subject. You don't know anything about science. You don't have a degree in science. You're not qualified. Leave my subject alone. It happens. Coordinate this stuff in advance. Everything is content. Some people would say, take any textbook and it's content, including translations. The class, when I first came to Korea and I first started teaching at university, the English professors were taking classic English literature and spending 80% of the class time speaking Korean about. And I said, well, you know what? Nowadays I say, well, that's a kind of content-based, but I hope that we'll use more English to talk about it. But sure, it's content, it's genuine, Some American really wrote it, or a Brit, or whatever. Indian, Filipino. I don't have any Philippine literature. I mean, I have at home, I didn't bring with it. Language teacher qualification in the subject area. Do you need it? That's related to the first one. So, what do you consider as content? How do you consider it? Well, what are you looking at? Are there certain contents that are more difficult or more easy in terms of English, in terms of content? Always think about learner anxiety. Are you nervous today? With me? I'm an American. Now, if I talk with this young lady 2 or 3 more times, you know she's going to be stressed and she's not going to understand anything I talk about today, are you? If I just bump her a couple times, lie. Don't tell the truth. I don't know. Do you have a boyfriend? Don't answer me. But asking personal questions is guaranteed to ratchet her stress level. Unless she's shown all of you the picture of her husband and her beautiful baby, in which case she's a proud mommy. At that point, she wouldn't have any stress. But unless she has shown all of you and been proud to say that I'm a mommy, any question about are you married is going to make her stress, because hey, I'm a foreigner, I'm in Philippines for 36 hours, am I looking for a short-term girlfriend? I mean, that could be in her brain. And no, my wife is a Kyeongsang woman, so anybody from Korea knows they are the toughest women in Korea. They kill first and ask questions later. So, don't neglect anxiety. I talk about a gradient continuum. I'm not going to talk about that today. This slide is actually recycled. But anyway, content is just one part of language learning. All right, so Think about good lessons. There should be interactivity, students talking to students. Today you haven't been doing that, you will. Clarity. Is my speaking clear? Do you get it? Clear language, clear ideas, clear content. Does the teacher know what he's talking about? Is the teacher organized? Accountability. If I want you to do something, do I check it? If I give you homework, do I check it? Is the teacher accountable? Do you give Paul or Dante a report after this, say, oh my gosh, Robert is terrible, never bring him back? Then I'd be accountable. Rigor, demand. Are you working today? Are you taking notes? Is there a test after this? Yes, there is. You guys have a test at the end of this course, right? In the next week or so, I'm going to have to send some questions to Paul. Now, if he includes them or if he doesn't, I don't know. But right now, you don't either. So you should be thinking. All right, language objective, something to look at later. So, teaching English, the same thing, you recycle it. This is the paper, it's in your book. It's online. A framework for constructing content English lessons. Here we go. This is the lesson from Northern Luzon. Math teacher gave this to me. What are we teaching? Pardon me? Angles. Okay. Geometry. Math, geometry, angles. Part 1. There's 3 lesson objectives here. Part 1, angles. Are you a math teacher? No? Okay. What's the second objective? English teachers talking about angles. In Luzon, I had a big workshop, and one table of teachers were all math teachers. And so they came up with it. What's the third thing? Now I need to give you a hint. Look here. Look here. Possibility, but no. One of my favorite things to talk about in a classroom is culture. This young man has a guitar. One of these 3 people up here is his hopeful bride-to-be. The other 2 people are his hopeful bride-to-be's parents. Now, Philippines is not Korea, but there are certain elements where things are not so different. And one of the things is, in the Philippines we use words like folk, right? And often in more traditional, especially in the countryside, I've heard, a young man who is meeting his bride-to-be's parents should do something like a bow, where they see more of the top of his head. So the argument here was that when he approaches a building at a certain distance, his parents, or her parents, his parents are gonna, the girl's parents, are going to see the top of his head in a way similar to bowing. And that was part, this is not from me, this is from teachers in Isabel. Alright? So the argument was, we're meeting a cultural constraint about a bow by being the right distance. If he was too far away, they would see more of the front of his face, and he would need to bow. But he doesn't need to bow, he's already got a built-in bow. But what about if the house is not on flat ground, if the house is on a hill? Then the angles change. Instead of 45 degree angle, 60 degree, how much farther does it need to be? I'm not a geometry teacher. It's just an illustration of how you can take a math class, an angles class, and talk about culture and language. Okay, so the 10 points, and it's in the reading. What are you teaching? Who are you teaching? My theme for language lesson planning is do not envision unimaginable students. Before you teach, it's very hard, but once you start teaching, I have 3 classes. I have my 9 a.m. Monday class. Oh my gosh. I don't like Mondays. I don't like 9 a.m. And neither do my students. It's the toughest class I teach. Now I'm lying a little bit because I don't teach 9 a.m. anymore. I'm senior enough that I don't teach anything before 10:30, and I don't teach Monday before noon. They say, we need to make a schedule. Yeah, okay, I'm available. I just don't take Monday morning classes. It's not worth it to me. I don't like it, they don't like it. Pick one class, think about them, design the lesson for them, and then adjust it for class B and class C. Don't try to make something for everything, because then you make something for no one. Choose one class. Content to be utilized. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about currency. Would you please share one with everybody until we run out? If there are two good friends in the room, you can share. If you're Korean, you might even have a coin in your pocket if you tell this one. Take one, pass it around. I'm so generous and kind, you don't even have to give it back. There's probably about $4 in there. I'll live without $4. We're going to use Korean coins. Identify why the student should care. Why should you care about money? Korean money. Well, maybe because you'll be able to use this in your class in the future. Hey, I found two more. Why should students care? Maybe they don't care about coin collecting. It's my hobby, it's not theirs. By the way, if you find any coin that's 1980 or earlier, give it back. Because I have very few. Identify the specific teaching points. You can call them teaching points, you can call them learning objectives. That's more politically correct language. What is it at the end of the day? As long as this is working, I'm okay. What is it we're teaching? Exactly. Now, develop and locate an exemplar text. Exemplar doesn't mean perfect. It means simply something like a sample, something we can work with. In this case, I'm not giving you any text because we don't have time. But it would be a short paragraph. Might be something I give them, might be something I tell them. Design student responses. That would be a task. What do you expect students to do as part of this lesson? And then, after that, it's kind of free. Students check their work. Students create new stories or new things. Students design a new coin, maybe. Students do group work, maybe. I don't like group work. Students do. And testing. Every class should have a test. That doesn't mean a written test, but it means at the end of the class, I can know. Did students learn anything? I know. Did I do a good job? I know. Do I need to teach this language area again because my objective wasn't met? Okay, so 10 points. It's in the reading, it's in your book. Make it your heart. This is becoming more and more accepted across the TESOL community as lesson time. Okay, task-based learning. Just takes a second to load the second slide. Same point. Are we teaching language or are we teaching something else? Are we teaching or are we pushing learning? So I scratched out the teaching part and said task-based language learning. So far, okay? 11 o'clock. Go, rock and roll. What's a task? What's a task?
Doing something.
Pardon me?
Doing something for a reason.
Doing something for a reason. Did you look at my PowerPoint?
No.
You're cunning. You're cunning. Teacher, cunning. Konglish, cunning means to cheat somehow. Task is doing something for a purpose. For a reason is really darn close. That's why I'm such a cheater. That's weird. Okay. What are our language learning objectives? Why am I in the classroom as a teacher in an English class, which I'll be doing almost all of July? I'm teaching an intensive course. Why am I here? What am I doing? What's the student's objective? Okay, for task, it's not just an activity or an exercise, so we might get into arguments. Have you watched any videos? Yes? No?
Yes.
Did you see a Rod Ellis lecture? That's too bad. Rod Ellis is a wonderful guy. He's a little cranky sometimes. He's a wonderful guy. He's not a wonderful lecturer generally. So if you give his lecture, 2 double copies. A task is not just an activity, something you do. It's not just an exercise practice, create 3 sentences for each vocabulary item. It's not just language practice, we're just practicing because we're practicing. Everybody stand up and say hello to your neighbor next to you. Say hello with 3 sentences. That would be an exercise because they've all studied it, they've all learned it, they've done it. A task is not teaching time, it's learning time. Teacher, shut up. In my teacher certificate course back in 1996 in England, I was doing something and my tutor, my trainer, said, Robert, shut up. Give your learners time to think. We fall in love. Now today, I don't have enough time. I got 3 things to go through. But in general, in language is really hard. We need to give learners time to think about what's happening, to ask themselves questions and maybe find the answers, or maybe write them down. Stop worrying about teaching. Start worrying about, are my learners growing, developing? Your task, your activity is directly, intimately connected to current language learning syllabus objectives. What is in the syllabus? What are we supposed to be learning? That's what the task is tied to. However, the problem is that a syllabus could be on many levels. Have you heard of functional or functional notional? Functional or functional notional means that our lesson plan is not tied to vocabulary. Our lesson plan is not tied to grammar points, like today we're studying third person S. I go, you go, he, she, it goes. No. Functional means what are things that you do with language? For example, if I step on his foot, I should laugh. No. Apologize. How can I apologize? I'm sorry. Or, different word. Excuse me. British might say, pardon me. So I give this example in class. Oh, I have a lot of girls here. Ladies, don't be shy. Okay? Excuse me, pardon me. I'm sorry, excuse me, pardon me. Right? This doesn't work quite as well in Korea because in Korea they have a mindset that pardon me and excuse me is different. I'm sorry is different. 미안, 실례합니다. These are different words used in different contexts, but in English we can. And she says, who's that? No. She says, thank you. But in Korea, thank you is far less common. Because there is a senior-junior relationship. Wow. Now I know what you think of me. Got her grade. Girl sitting in the front. Teachers, don't take yourself too seriously. If your students are laughing with you, hopefully not just at you, then there's a lot less stress in the classroom. Do you like my haircut? I could wear a wig. I could get implants. Implants are very popular in Korea. Then I would be so stressed about me. Oh, is my hair good today? Do you like my chocolate? Korean, I like chocolate. In America, we would say beer belly. I don't drink that much beer. I like beer, but I don't drink very much. But I do like chocolate. And bay means belly. So I talk to my students about my chocolate bay. What happens? A week or 2 later, some student shows up in my room. They want to talk about something. And they're bringing a little off the box for my chocolate. Thank you very much, but no thank you. Stop teaching. Help students learn. I think a little humor can help learn. Connected to the syllabus, what are we trying to learn? Are we trying to learn third person S, or is our functional notional syllabus based on learning to do things like apologize? So that each class may be less about vocabulary and grammar and more about being able to use the language. And that's very much a task-based theme. How is a language learning task different from an activity or exercise? Well, we've kind of kicked it around. Let's look at some definitions. Willis is one of the 3 or 4 major speakers on task-based activities. Oops, there's a word. So we are looking at sets theory. Go back to your math classes, right? If this is activity, from the spelling, right? All the spelling you ever learned goes away on the whiteboard, I promise you. And this is maybe an event. They overlap, but they're not the same thing. Well, maybe task is an event. Maybe people disagree. An activity where the target language is used by the learner for a communicative purpose. To communicate, not just to practice, in order to achieve an outcome. We can say, aha, I did that. I ordered meal in our sample restaurant. A task is an activity that is central to the methodological cycle. Our design for the lesson, task is a key part. You can't say, oh, we're out of time, skip the task. You can't skip the task. The task is a key part of the lesson. If you're able to skip the task, it's not task-based teaching. Okay? Bottom line, if you can skip the task, it's not task-based teaching. And here's the part where 80% of all language teachers can't accept it. Learners are free to choose whatever language they want. If I spent last class teaching I'm sorry, and that's the wrong choice. If I spend the last class teaching pardon me, but my students kept saying I'm sorry, excuse me, they completed the task successfully. They didn't use the target language. Well, I designed the task to practice target language, but they completed the task successfully. Okay? It is very much tied to that functional, notional approach of getting things done, not worrying as much. So the problem is we come in with our intermediate level students and they already know how to do a bunch of stuff. And you give them a task, and they do it with the stuff they know. And at the end of the class, when you're talking about it, you say, so my disappointment is I didn't see you using your new language. You're just practicing your old language, especially if you're practicing your not so good language. The stuff you already know. I don't need you practicing your middle school English here in university. You need to grow your language. You want to sound like an educated person. When you go work for a company, you want to sound like an educated man. You don't want to sound like a barefoot taxi driver. I talk to Koreans about this. Go to America. Lots of taxi drivers don't speak English very well. They're from other countries. Right? Some of them have doctorates in their home countries, but their English just doesn't sound very good. They're really smart. And they can talk about their major in English, but they sound uneducated. That's not what you want. So let's try to do things that are more difficult. Don't do it because it's easy. Do it because it's helping you grow. That's the teacher's mission, to push them, but they completed the task. You cannot give them a bad grade. All right, Rod Ellis, who is very much part of the site TESOL family, calls it a work plan, a plan for learning with a primary focus on meaning, not on language. That's something that was hard for Ellis, because Ellis was a language-focused guy first. Okay? He is, in some ways, the grandfather of language acquisition. He wrote a really big, important book. I call it the Bible of second language acquisition. He was a god in that field. And then he took on task-based, which is kind of like the antithesis, the opposite of what he had been doing. Involves real-world processes of language use, even if the task is artificial. We know we're in a classroom. We know this menu isn't quite genuine. If I order a medium rare steak from this fellow, I'm not eating a medium rare steak at lunch. Sorry, guys. But at least we can imagine. At least we can imagine that it's related. Okay? Any of the 4 language skills. Do you know the 4 language skills? Please tell me you do. Language skills. Listening. Thank you. Listening, speaking, reading, writing. In any order. Involves cognitive processes. Remember we talked about think and call? It means you gotta think. If it's automated, if it's so easy, he's from Japan. Oh my God! Are you okay? I'm fine, thank you. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. And you? Right? No, I'm thinking. There's a great cartoon. I didn't bring it, but there's a great cartoon. It came out of a Japanese teacher's magazine, and it's got this crumpled bicycle. This little boy looks like he's half dead, right? Clearly the bicycle has been hit by a car, and this foreigner, this long nose, runs up, and he speaks in English. He says, "How are you?" This little boy meets me up. "I'm fine, thank you, and you?" I'm thinking. Cognitive processes. Clearly defined communicative outcome. We know when you have communicated effectively. No maybe. We know. It's very clear. The students know and you know. Noonan, another great star. Syllabus is centered not on an ordered list of linguistic items, vocabulary, grammar, but on a collection of tasks. Okay, not just notions or functions, not just being able to ask where something is in a department store, but the syllabus is a bunch of tasks. Now, I don't think that's very realistic and doesn't happen very often. But what's important is he makes a distinction between pedagogical tasks. What's important is he makes a distinction between real-world tasks and pedagogical tasks. Real-world tasks, we understand. Things you do in the real world. He says pedagogical tasks are designed so that we use our grammatical knowledge to express meaning. Now, grammar has a small meaning and a big meaning. Remember Humpty Dumpty? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall after far away. Not that Humpty Dumpty. Well, the same Humpty Dumpty, but not the limerick. Beyond the looking glass, or one of those, Humpty Dumpty did a kind of a gibberish. Do you remember the name of that? Jabberwocky. Where he would tell like poems, but he had a lot of invented words. And Alice said, "What is that?" And he said, "It means this." She said, "It doesn't mean that anywhere I know." And he says, "Words mean what I want them to mean. Words mean what I, the speaker, want them to mean. Nothing more and nothing less." Okay? Grammar fits there. Grammar does not just mean A plus B plus C, nouns, verbs, predicates, objects. Grammar also includes all of the science, we talked about language science, all of the science, all of the rules that control language, including what do words mean, vocabulary, stringing words together, morphology, how do we write, how do we speak, all that language science is another way of saying grammar. So using all that language stuff that we know in order to say what we want to say. So pedagogical tasks are a piece of classroom work that involves the learners, not teaching time, in comprehending, understanding, manipulating, moving around, changing, producing, creating new, or interacting in the target language, which is English probably, while their attention, while their brain is focused on mobilizing their language stuff in order to do something. In order to do something, to express meaning, to say what they want to say. This is that balance of content and language. We're using language to do something, the content side, rather than just to play with the language form. Language substitution drill. I am a boy. Girl.
I'm a girl.
Dog.
okay.
You've all done that in your class. That's called language substitution. That's simply manipulating language. In this case, we just manipulated the object.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.